recorded. This will be available to everybody who's signed up. And I will be sending this recording out via email no later than tomorrow morning, so you can watch this with additional classes, or even if you have to leave early, something like that, you'll have this available and ready to you, and this will just be right on YouTube. All right, so what you'll see now, actually, is that our room is going to transition a little bit. So, give it a second to load up here. And just to give you the lay of the land before we come on camera, below where it says camera in that gray box, you'll see an area that says Q&A pod. We would love your questions about this yearbook collection, and throughout the program you can type them in there. Once we're kind of done with our major presentation, we're going to have a nice Q&A session, and we'll answer those questions coming through, so please put them in there anytime. Now, I guess without further ado, I'm going to turn on the camera here so you can see Colin and I. Hello, everybody.
Hi, guys.
We're really excited to be closing out our webinar schedule this year with this program about a collection that is definitely close to our hearts, especially Colin's here at the museum. We've been collecting yearbooks for how many years?
We've been using yearbooks for educational programming for a long time, but we first had the idea to digitize these yearbooks and put them online about 3 or 4 years ago, and the website where a lot of these yearbooks are drawn from, I think, turned 3 this year, so 3 years old. It's a nice toddler of a website, but no, they're really, really fascinating, and we're really excited to share them with you.
So that's what you'll be seeing throughout the program today, is kind of our selection of yearbooks, especially as we look towards, you know, what the end of the year looks like for these students. So literally what you guys are going through right now, maybe you have a couple days left of school, a few more weeks left of school, and anything in between. We're going to be looking at that exact same time frame for students, but in 1940. But actually, before we get up to all that, I thought, well, to put us all on a level playing field here, because we're going to see a lot of probably a little slightly embarrassing images from the 1940s, we actually thought that we would show you our embarrassing high school senior photos. So there's Colin and I way back in the late 90s and 2000s in our senior year.
And we'll talk about, you know, what conclusions and assumptions you can draw from yearbook photos and images. And I'm sure you can draw several things from my attire in the late 90s, but we'll leave the deep interpretation to the historical images and hopefully leave our feelings intact.
And who hasn't done this pose before?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Looks great. The hair behind the ear, for me, that's...
Yeah, so anyway, there's our kind of embarrassing confession or what have you to you all. And we just want you to think in the back of your heads, as we're analyzing these yearbooks that are 70 years old, there'll be people probably doing the same things with your yearbooks. So we're going to ask you at the end of the program what you think people will be looking at from 2017. All right, so of course, you know, modern day now, even you saw our late 90s, you know, 2000s yearbook photos. Now we're all the way, of course, in 2017. But we are really taking a trip down memory lane and really going back into the 1940s. And as I said, going on a cross-country exploration, we're going to show you where exactly. But before we do that, I thought actually we could kind of all start off on kind of level playing field here so we all know what we're talking about. And so when we analyze yearbooks and some of these photos that you see here on screen, we'll be looking at a little bit more in depth. We just want to understand what kind of sources we're actually looking at. And I know you've all probably learned about this before, but again, let's just kind of get it all out here. So first off, you all know there's 2 kinds of sources that we spend a lot of time analyzing in history: primary sources and secondary sources. So primary sources, they are original items or records that have survived from the past and were a direct experience from a time or event. We deal with these a lot here at the museum. They are at the heart of our collection, whether it's artifacts, and we've got big artifacts like the C-47 and the Sherman tank there. Of course, lots of propaganda here at the museum, hundreds of posters in our collection, thousands of photographs, and actually some of those are online, and we're happy to share those resources with you at the end too. We have a collection of thousands of oral histories. Many of them are also digitized. So that's the first-hand testimony for veterans or people who witnessed or experienced events in World War II. And then also, we love all that kind of personal material here. So journals, letters, archival material, things like that. And these are some things that you also probably use in your history papers when you're doing research. But we won't also discount the other major source, which is secondary sources. Now, they're also important to us too. They are accounts of the past created by people without firsthand experience sometime after they happened. And so you probably think of your textbooks and things like that. Even sometimes what we create and what we share about the war, it comes from our voices here. And I know we showed you our yearbook photos. We're not that old, right? So anyway, so yeah, those are the two differences. And when we talk specifically about yearbooks in this sense, yearbooks are going to be an important primary source for us because especially when we look at how the war affected people your age. And they have lots of interesting little bits and pieces of information inside of them that help us piece together what was going on at that school or in that town or community, and then of course across the country. So I thought actually to start off today, give you guys a poll question. And this is actually one of those poll questions where you type in your answer, you don't select one. And we just want to know from you, what kinds of information do you think you can learn from life during the war from a yearbook?
So yeah, the idea of what you think you might see or what type of things you might find in these yearbooks that were put together like yearbooks are today by teachers and probably a yearbook or an annual club or class, and what type of events they thought would be important to chronicle to show the life of and the year in the life of a student during World War II.
Yeah, especially if any of you are on like the yearbook team at your school, you can even think about like, what did I use as like a yearbook editor to put this all together? Like, what was important? All right, we'll let you, again, since you have to type it in, we're making it a little bit more challenging
Sure.
for you guys. We'll give you a few more seconds here to answer. But you even saw a glimpse of what this looked like. We saw a few early yearbook pictures as you guys were waiting in that lobby. So let's just look at some of these results now. Feel free to type some more in. I like the way that, society was. And I think that's probably how people will look at our yearbooks and from whatever year,
Sure.
you analyze. And important aspects of life, which sports are the most popular. Maybe we'll get into that a little bit too. And then we do enjoy looking at clothing styles, and hairstyles are pretty awesome from the 1940s as well.
And it's definitely something to think about too when looking at these pre-1950s artifacts. The idea of a teenager really didn't exist of a young person with a disposable income. So a lot of the fashions we'll see students sort of wearing cut-down versions of what their parents would wear. So these students may look a lot older, but they are students in 17, 18 years old. They just may look a lot older because there weren't dedicated fashions for young people back then.
The other thing I like that someone put in here, their social lives. You'll see that these yearbooks, and we'll look at some, are filled with signatures. Mm-hmm. And so you can see relationships between people. I don't know, I can't remember if we included this one, but I'm thinking about that one lady who she circled everyone she dated and all of her best friends in her yearbook. And so that's another really great example. All right, you guys have some really great ideas. Let's actually move on and show you where we're actually going today. And so you can see we're hitting almost every region of the United States and going even as far as Hawaii. So these are the yearbooks in different regions that Colin will be kind of guiding you through today. So do you wanna start? And let's start with the practice actually for you guys. Right. So you want to explain what they're seeing on the screen?
Thanks, Chrissy. Absolutely. So what you guys are seeing on the screen now is a page from one of the yearbooks that we have featured on our yearbook collection, our digital learning project. See you next year, high school yearbooks from World War II. And this is from the Prescott High School, Hassayamper, I believe I'm pronouncing that right, from 1944 in Prescott, Arizona. So this is a page directly from this primary source. And what we do a lot at the museum here when looking at primary and secondary sources, and that we do with teachers and students who interact with us, is we talk a lot about reading artifacts. So we're going to read this artifact. And with this one, it can be in the literal sense. We'll look at what we can see with our eye and what we can read as well. So the two images we see at the top of this page from the yearbook, they are two flags. And they're flags with stars and numbers on them. And these are what are called gold star flags. And obviously, we can associate gold stars with lots of things, both in school and out of school. And so one of the things that we want to address is items and terms from the 1940s in America sometimes have vastly different meanings than what we have today. So as sort of a follow-up question to what Chrissy, who introduced that poll question of what we might see here in these yearbooks, I'm going to ask, seeing this in a yearbook from World War II, a gold star flag, what do we think the gold star on this flag might mean? What do you think it might mean? Again, focusing on this is a wartime artifact, and that this is a school that is chronicling their students' experience living through World War II. What do we think a gold star flag might mean?
And you can see, put the poll question right below us here on the camera. So again, another type in one. We're not making this easy for you guys today. So
it's going to be your exit exam,
yeah.
your final exam as you finish up your school year.
Use some extra brain cells in your last maybe couple weeks of school here. All right, so we'll give you a little bit of time to read what this says and see what you think. All right, we're getting some interesting, we're getting some interesting results here. Maybe we'll wait for a few more to trickle in. But, let's see. All right, I'm thinking, we've got a lot of different ones. I kind of like it. I'm going to broadcast what we have. Again, add what you want after we broadcast. Sure. And you can see some different interpretations, and it shows you how a term gold star can mean a lot of different things. So when we say that, like a gold star school, that means, like, to me, that would mean like, a school that has high achievement. You get a gold star for doing a good job. What does it mean here, Colin?
So in the terms of World War II, these flags here that we see, they're small. They're not things that you would hang or run on a flagpole in front of your school or your business or your home. These were more personal banners that would be hung in the windows or shop fronts of folks who had loved ones or relatives serving in World War II. These are called service flags. And there were two different types, and I think some of our groups who've answered are hitting right on their meaning, very, 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 very close to it at least. The service flags came in two different colors. For every relative, son or brother or father or uncle you had serving in the armed forces, you would have a blue star on a white field of a flag. This is a special type of flag being displayed here by the students of Prescott High, who talk about, in the second paragraph, it says, the 9 gold stars represent former students of our school and people who, yes, they died, but they didn't die in vain. So gold stars on service flags be changed to blue stars be changed to gold rather if a relative or a loved one, or in this case a former classmate, had entered the armed forces and had passed away in service, either in combat, in training, or other means. So a gold star, we think of it as something very, very positive in today's age. Back then it was a way for students to express their grief, or to display that they had members of their school, faculty, or student body who were no longer with them. So something that today means something completely different than what it did 70 years ago. And you guys did great with that, got right to the heart of what you thought it might mean, and we'll be doing more of that as we go through.
So yeah, that's what this is all about. You could literally, I know we have an hour with each other, so we're not going to do this, but you could literally flip through every page of these kinds of yearbooks and do an analysis just as in-depth as we did. This is one page of the Prescott High School yearbook. And so we're going to actually start off with kind of that similar theme of talking about the realities of war, losing friends, losing former students. And a really great yearbook to showcase this one is McKinley High, all the way in Honolulu, Hawaii.
So for those of you who know your World War II history and the narrative of World War II, America's involvement in the war started right here in the territory of Hawaii. It wasn't even a state then. It was just a territory. This is where the Imperial Japanese Navy attacked the United States at Pearl Harbor on December 7th. And this is a yearbook from 1944, right in where the war began for the United States. So in looking through these yearbooks, you often see a lot of similar things, very patriotic or martial imagery. Here we see a mobilized Lady Liberty, Statue of Liberty, with a huge American flag and what looks like maybe even a tank or something below it. And then on the opposite facing, students reading their yearbook. And the dedication saying, our world is going through turmoil, change, but we have hope, a transition to be followed by an age of real progress and enlightenment. So young people, even in this dark and chaotic time, expressing that they had hope for the future and that the war they were going through would ultimately lead to a more peaceful age.
But there's also the realities of war, that they touch on quite a bit, specifically in this yearbook, too.
So talking about those Gold Star flags or Gold Star students, this is another page from the McKinley Yearbook, and this is showing off the faces, names, and short biographies of former students at McKinley who have passed away in service. And if you notice from their last names, the majority of students at McKinley were Japanese American, which we'll get into the treatment of Japanese American students and families on the mainland U.S. A bit later. But people who may have been viewed with skepticism or even fear that they might be disloyal and more loyal to an ancestral homeland in Japan. But students of Japanese American descent who volunteered to fight, and these are students from McKinley who have passed away in service in 1944. We often have yearbooks today broken down in sort of a student life calendar of what was happening in the fall to the spring when yearbooks traditionally come out. This shows directly how students were getting involved with the war effort. Even though there were students who were serving, there were many more who were still back here at home. And the bottom picture in the bottom corner actually speaks to a direct action by these students. During World War II, the purchasing of war bond sales or war stamps was encouraged as a way to help the United States raise money for its war effort. The idea being at the end of the war, the United States would pay back your loan with interest. So it was a patriotic way of you helping out the war effort, even if you could only spend a few cents here and there. And this is an ambitious campaign where these students at McKinley actually raised enough war bond funds to purchase a bomber. They purchased actually a B-24.
Yeah, the B-24 Madame Pele.
A B-24 Madame Pele bomber emblazoned with some Hawaiian nose art for the war effort. And we see this a lot in these yearbooks where students purchase jeeps or tanks or planes or raising funds for a Red Cross. The idea that even though there were students who were fighting, the students who were still at home were doing their best to support the war effort, and we see this a lot in these yearbooks as well.
And think these students aren't, you might have a part-time job, but you're in school most of the day, so using any of that extra income from where they got it, like, whether it's something younger students, like an allowance, all the way to maybe something from your summer job or your part-time job going towards something like this, like buying a bomber.
And today we have it's a strictly volunteer army. This was an army that was being raised of both volunteers and people who were being drafted or conscripted. And it was an army that eventually reached the size of 16 million people. So almost everyone had a friend, a relative, a loved one who was serving somewhere. So the idea of helping out the war effort, it wasn't this abstract idea. It was very personal. You were supporting your classmate or your brother or your next door neighbor or your boss or your uncle or father. So students were very, very much encouraged and very, very willing to participate in fundraising at campaigns like this.
Yeah, and they raised a lot, and you'll see that in these yearbooks. We're going to turn to another one to kind of continue to talk about or see a common theme that we've already actually seen, and that is the Gold Star. So you'll see as you flip through this collection that this is a common term for what we just saw.
So this is a yearbook. So we left the West Coast. This is a yearbook from Kenmore. I believe it's in upstate New York. And here we see two terms that we've already spoken about that have very different meanings between now and then. Gold star, we've already talked about what that means. But even the term now that we still use, an honor roll, where today we use that for students who have academic achievements, have gotten a high enough GPA. But there they used it again to show students who were in service or who were serving or who had passed away in service. And even things like the student council, we have those in most of our junior, middle, and high schools. Student government, where students can learn about the democratic process and make choices and decisions for their class. We see the student council from Kenmore to the right there. And just to show how the war really pervaded everything, we see a picture of the big three. But behind these students, we see Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the President of the United States at that time, in the center, flanked by Winston Churchill, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain, and something that probably would not happen today, a picture of Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union, a man who post-war would be vilified as a brutal dictator and totalitarian in his own right. But here he's one of the allies, at least at this point, so we see him on the wall as well.
All right, now we're going to kind of get into the meat of our program here today, because, as I said, we really wanted to focus this on talking about, the idea of summer approaching and the school year coming to a close. And I want to start off with a poll question, as we'll dig in and we'll see a lot of this. Now, this is an easier one for you all. Let me make it a little bigger. Talk about what you think the path of many students, what was it after they graduated? And we maybe have touched on this a little bit in maybe some of the gold star and honor rolls that we've seen, but there are a lot of choices out there. There are a lot of choices for students today, and of course there's a lot of choices back then too of what you could do.
And we'll talk about as well about how the education, like everything else, was affected by World War II, and how even rites of passage like graduation and when commencements would take place would change and would be accelerated to meet the needs for manpower during the war.
All right, so this is kind of a toughie, because I think really all of these are legitimate choices and future paths for these almost graduates, right? Joining the military, either enlisting. Many students did that, and some did it even before they graduated at age 17 with their parents' consent. But also, the prospect of getting a job, working in defense factories or working in any way to support the war effort. And the opportunities to go on to higher education, or kind of related to getting a job, even additional training in a specific sort of trade or craft or industry. So those are all kind of similar. So I think these were all on the table for these students as they figured out what their future was going to be.
Absolutely, and speaking to boys and young men in the room, this in World War II, this obviously was an all-male military. So it was obviously the U.S. military had a great need for manpower. So it was made very, very attractive with some of the promises of what they could come home to, be it promises of future education, being able to afford a home or to go to school, was meant to encourage folks to enlist or to consider paths that would put them into the military faster. And education, the whole was militarized. You would learn about math or world geography through the lens of World War II. You would learn about geography as where the world was happening, where the war was happening around the world. Or you might learn math by doing calculations about wind speed or things that related to aerial combat, or what's the load-bearing weight on this bridge that you're trying to build across this river. So word problems and essay questions that might be a bit different than today.
Yeah, that's for sure. So to kind of kick off our analysis and looking at these kind of spring rites of passage, well, at least for us, I would see it as a springtime tradition, but for some of these schools, you'll see it's throughout the entire year. We're going to kick it off, though, with a yearbook that we analyzed quite a bit here at the museum, and it's from Topeka High School in Kansas. And they're 1944, kind of right in the midst of the war yearbook, called The Sunflower. And we're going to kick off with something that happens at most high schools, if not all. Of course, there we see the senior class, and that senior class photo. None of this, and they don't look as goofy as we do.
No, they're much more posed and much more serious. It seems to be the predominant pose is sort of a head tilt. That seems to be what most of them were going for here.
And of course, we're going to talk about prom. How could we not at this time of year?
So again, guys, reading these as artifacts like we're doing, you guys are doing what professional historians do for a living. We see here, analyzing both the pictures and the text, spelled out very clearly. We have prom royalty, King Bill Wall and Queen Mary Louis done up in their finery, tuxedo and lovely gown, with a biography on the 2 pages as well. But we're going to see that there's another set of prom royalty as well on the next page. So during World War II in the United States, not everything was a perfect society. A perfect society doesn't exist, but hopefully we're making our improvements as we go on and grow as a country. So we have 2 sets of prom royalty. We have our white king and queen, and we have our African American king and queen, King Lloyd and Queen Barbara. We notice they share a single page. It's just their first names, not their surnames. And so this is due to the fact that in large parts of the country during World War II, even while we're fighting against the forces of racism and fascism abroad, segregation was still widely considered legal and appropriate throughout many schools and businesses and other organizations throughout the country. So this yearbook we use because it really puts it in stark terms of this false idea of separate but equal. These folks get one less page, and they don't even get their last names in the paper. And this school, it's interesting, it was academically integrated. That is, there were racially integrated classes, but for all activities like sports or prom, it was kept racially segregated. So again, the United States had work to do in cleaning up its own house, and World War II helped accelerate the process of kicking off things like the civil rights movement, equal rights for women, and other important civil rights achievements.
And Topeka would actually become a critical place for that when we talk about the civil rights movement in Brown versus Board of Education,
right there.
Centered around Topeka, Kansas. So kind of interesting to see what that looks like. A decade previous to that, a little more than a decade. And then we're going to turn, so we've Kansas, now we're going to go further west to go to Sioux Falls, just go and stay in our Midwest area and go to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and go to Washington High School and their 1943 Warrior Yearbook. And we're going to continue with that royalty beauty shots here.
So it's important to understand, too, that even though the war was really subsumed all aspect of American society during this time, young people still wanted the things that they perceived as normal. They wanted some degree of normalcy, and they wanted things that they had expected in the past before the war started. It's like, I want to be prom king or prom queen. So you see a lot of these yearbooks, they do address the war, but students still had vibrant, separate student lives. And we see here in these really, really high-fashion shots of the queen, her court, and attendance in this yearbook that students wanted some normalcy to hang on to. Yes, they were fine with contributing to the war effort, but they wanted some chance to be what they were, which was young kids. So they needed something to cling on to during the war. And this yearbook illustrates that very, very well, but saying that they can be both patriotic and still have social lives to experience at the same time.
And prom is, one of those things that endures from, and during these times of conflict, all the way to today and previous to this. All right, and then we're going to just turn quickly now, again, just staying here in the Midwest and go to Chicago to Schurz High School, which is one of our more interesting yearbooks because there are a few colorized pages, like this one that you see here, and that really doesn't happen that often in 1940s yearbooks, so...
No, and we see a lot with yearbooks as well. I think some of you put in the first your first response that what type of information you could see from yearbooks or learn from them about how the society was, or even I think someone even mentioned the budget that yearbooks or schools might have, and that's absolutely correct. From some of these yearbooks, we'll see they're very slim, or there may not be that many photographs at all. Certainly, this yearbook from Schurz High School in Chicago is an outlier. This has beautiful full color pages, and it was a very, very affluent school. The school's still standing in Chicago. It's sort of a historic landmark now more than a school, but it shows one type of environment that students could go to school in, with beautiful landscaping, a nice, what looks like a slate roof, and really an impressive facade at this very, very affluent school. So we're going to look at this one.
Keep that in your head.
Keep that in your mind, in your mind's eye, as we look
and then
at.
We're going to go to our next high school, Topaz High School, which is in a itty-bitty place, Delta, Utah, and their 1945 yearbook, so the conclusion of the war. Let's see where these students go to school.
So we're in a small hamlet, really, more than a town, at this high school in Topaz, and we see here some great signatures. Those are always a lot of fun, especially as students today. Some people have classes still where they learn cursive script. Some don't, so we always like to see students pondering over
Try
them.
to interpret. Yeah, what you see on screen there. So there's one layer of it.
Sure.
What's the next layer?
And beneath the layer of that, we see, as opposed to the Schurz High School, we don't see any lovely landscaping. We don't see any slate roofs or inspiring facades. We see some long tar paper shacks, barrack-style buildings. And this is another experience that some students had during World War II. This is one of the called officially relocation centers, but this is a Japanese internment camp, a Japanese-American internment camp, which after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Franklin Roosevelt, the president, signed Executive Order 9066, which called for the forcible removal of Japanese Americans and those of Japanese American descent into relocation centers or incarceration or internment centers further inland, away from the West Coast, where it was thought they would be spies or saboteurs. So talking about normalcy, which we saw students trying to recreate in that Sioux Falls yearbook, these students put together a yearbook in perhaps the most abnormal environment during World War II. Congregated together, removed from their homes, held
and
behind
their former school too. So
yeah, exactly, behind barbed wire, kept under guard, not allowed to leave, but trying to create some normalcy of student life in this. So this is a yearbook that actually came out of one of these Japanese American internment centers. This one's not on our website yet, so we wanted to share a few samples from it because it's a real rich resource.
And you can see, I think, too, trying to live the normal life as best as you can. So there's the bits and pieces of this yearbook that are in other yearbooks that are not obviously inside of, internment camps, like Senior Wills. We'll actually see, I think, another one a little later on, and they're kind of silly and funny if you read any of them.
And talking about things that are different now than what they were then. Students and young people always have their own language which they communicate with, their own slang and slang terms, and that's true in these yearbooks as well. And on the website, we actually have a sort of a glossary of slang terms from the 40s that are fun to experience as well. But we see the first student here, Seiko Akihosho, she wills her jiving to all the wallflowers, so I guess she was a good dancer, or at least a more uninhibited dancer than some other students.
Right, and so in addition to slang, I think a lot of these show inside jokes, things that maybe to us is I don't get that, But again, if being in that school environment, you guys all know that you have inside jokes with your friends or your class, and you can see that kind of on display here. So we can kind of ponder what some of these mean, really, Yeah. I like the one on the bottom in the first column that Yas leaves for better or for worse. So. And of course, there's also senior superlatives, which also show up in a lot of yearbooks, like most popular, most handsome, most attractive. And so you can see all of those students here on the left-hand side and see a little bit more of where they lived and where they went to school on the right-hand side. Yeah,
very dusty, very remote, a real sort of lack of facilities. So it's a wonder they were able to create something this clean and really this ambitious. This yearbook is very broad and showing the aspect of student life in these camps. And this, we also see, this is shows senior graduates from the fall term. I think we'll talk about that a bit more in another yearbook, how they had different class commencements as well.
And also kind of interesting, related to then, finally, there's a page in here about graduates. We see, of course, in the typical cap and gown. And I think this is also forward-thinking as well, like many dedications, but it also says something kind of interesting that we underlined in red. Though their number has been greatly decreased, their spirit of comradeship has united them through their high school years. What does that mean?
I mean, it can mean a number of things. But obviously it's reflecting that, again, like our previous poll question was, where were a lot of military-age young men going before or after high school was completed? They were going into the military. And then also the understanding that people were, taken away from their homes and sent to these places. So the number has been greatly decreased as the camps were set up and then closed. But the spirit of comradeship has united them throughout their high school years.
All right, and then we're going to now go to the East Coast and go to Dartmouth, Massachusetts, to look at the 1943 Harpoon for some more senior-related stuff. And one of our favorites, another kind of inside jokey sort of one that we don't totally get, but seniors in a nutshell, which is a great page in here.
So we see, it's where I guess students were allowed to submit their own, their own sort of superlatives, pondering when they were happiest, but then also their probable fates. See things from jobs like typists or receptionists or hairdressers to things like very succinct probable fate, married. So it's talking about the different expectations too of women working outside the home that changed during World War II. But then some who still aspire to what was then probably seen as sort of normalcy of staying home and working in the home as well. And then we see as well by each of these student portraits what their focus was on in terms of the course that they had pursued. We see commercial and agricultural and some of the classes they took as well, with Eleanor and Melvin down there. And Melvin not looking nearly as happy as Eleanor to have his photo taken.
Yeah, she looks maybe ready to graduate. Maybe him, I don't know, not so much. All right, and then we're going to travel to Central High School in Duluth, Minnesota, and this is, again, the 1945, towards the end of the war, yearbook, and more of, this is another one that kind of makes us smile and kind of be like, huh?
Yeah, it's great because it's they actually gave out sort of, physical representations of these awards. We see, I think, the young lady on the right, someone looks like a big bowl, and then
the guy has a big spoon.
The guy has a big spoon, and some of these as well. We know from yearbooks today, most of the superlatives are positive, but the student with the spoon, the male, he's actually been awarded his nomination says homeliest boy, which is I think sort of
generally
like
an insult.
Yeah, sort of like plainest or not the least attractive young man, which I think is completely unfair. He looks like a
normal person.
Yeah, normal teenager. But so, yeah, the idea of putting sort of negative superlatives in a yearbook, it's certainly, I don't think would happen today. But yeah, great visuals and great images showing students whiling away the hours. But then, yeah, these actual physical trophies, hardware that they got for their superlatives.
Most, least, whatever. So. And then let's go to, this is a cool yearbook. For a lot of reasons, we're not going to look at all of it today. The Daisy Chain, which is in Waco, Texas. And notice, kind of how Colin mentioned before, this is one of the coolest covers, and it has a military theme throughout the entire yearbook.
And that was not uncommon, that students would take on a military or martial theme for their class yearbook. Here we see a dive bomber. And in the page of this yearbook, which is scanned in on the WWII website, we see images in the marginalia of descending paratroopers, machine gunners.
Yeah, there we go.
Perfect. So this whole yearbook has a martial or military theme, even down to the class portraits. We see the two folks here who are kings or presidents of their class posing by a plane at an air base. And two, if you can zoom in or look at the
underline there,
the underlining that we've done, we see that the young man Bobby Martin, he's graduating in the mid-year class, and I believe.
Is she?
Bobby, I believe her name is.
She's also Bobby with an IE.
Bobby with an IE is graduating in the June class. So this was done to, like we said, to get students out of school faster and to get them into the military quicker. So instead of a typical fall to spring semester, you would have maybe 2, sometimes 3 graduations per year. So students' education...
Summer, right?
Absolutely. So, yeah. They would have graduations in January, graduations in June, sometimes in August. Typically how colleges work these days. But even then, the idea of getting students out into the military or available to do war work on the home front.
All right. So we are going to switch and continue to the Broadway High School. This is another great one here, and it's the SEAL, hopefully I'm saying that right, yearbook from Seattle. And this one has a lot of awesome little tidbits in it, too. And as I said, we're going to analyze a couple of them here. For Mrs. Eriks, she said she can't hear me. I think all of you can still hear me, and she might just need to refresh the room. But let's look at a theme that we've already kind of touched on again and again, but with some good cartoons here.
So I remember working on when I was in my school newspaper and in the late 90s. We were still manually laying things out on dummy sheets and things like that. And I'm sure now it's all done with computer programs laying things out. However, things back in the 1940s it were much more homemade. We see actually line and cartoon drawings in these yearbooks. And so we see a sort of caricatured sergeant with a big jaw pointing to the seniors who are leaving school to join. To join what? They don't even have to say what to join. It's implied they're leaving to join the military. That's how universal the war was in people's minds.
And look how long, that is a long list of people, to be going off and joining. And then I love the other cartoon, too. I guess if we have any seniors in the room, they can understand this one a little bit.
Seniors or even, like sort of if you're the high class at your elementary or junior or middle school, it's obviously a senior looking at sort of as a caricatured freshman, and he's saying, gosh, they get smaller every year, which I'm sure some of you have experienced seeing people.
As a freshman or
as a senior today, right. Wondering who are these children that are suddenly walking the halls and what are they doing here?
So some common themes. All right, now we're going to travel to West Division High School in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to see. Oh, this is another Wally. Is this Wally Westside? Right? Yeah. They're kind of weird mascot, but we found this another. I think a lot of it's inside jokey sort of stuff, but secret senior statistics. So
some of these like schools have mascots. Some schools would have their mascot sort of be like a narrator or sort of a storyteller in these yearbooks. So we have Wally Westside, this guy with the crossed eyes and like a sort of a zoot suit, and I think he's holding a microphone in his hand, giving some secret senior stats, which I think is probably just more doing some quick and easy math. But things like the total number of graduates, 105.5. One is making up the other half in June, so I guess one didn't finish all his coursework in time. How tall or how much everyone weighed in total. But then also things like the total number of lipsticks used, depending on the number of lips and how active they are, is listed as 1,040. So sort of inside jokey, like Chrissy said, but also giving a nice snapshot of this wartime school.
All right, and then they have this really dramatic cartoon about, all right, now what,
So it's a great composite image. I think it's in one of the first pages of the yearbook, showing this recent graduate from Westside in Milwaukee, sort of either dreaming or fantasizing or even realizing what's going to come next for him, which is enlistment in the military. So you see this really done effectively here in this image, with the cap and gown being replaced with the uniform and the gun. And then also, again, terms that may not be very familiar to people who aren't deep into World War II history or have family members who served in the military. Another cartoon from Westside High where someone is handing out a diploma to a recent graduate, and it says, "It behooves me to present you your diploma, and oh yes, here's your draft notice. You are now 1A." And 1A meant someone who was very healthy, had no family or job ties that would prevent them from joining the military immediately. So this guy is being given his diploma. And his notice to report for military service at the same time.
Right, so think about that reality of, what's going to be next here. And before we actually toured the yearbooks, I actually thought one last poll question. We've seen a lot about students' futures here, and we've discussed it kind of at length. But I want you to think of where you are now. Well, again, whether you're elementary school, middle school, high school. If people were looking at your own yearbook, wouldn't even necessarily say high school, 70 years or so in the future, what would be some of the themes and messages, whether from your school, from your community or town, from even our country? And what do you think that might be? What do you think people like us, 70 years in the future, will be analyzing?
And this is a great collection that we love having here at the museum, that teaching about World War II history. But this is really a lesson or an exercise that can be adapted for really any time period. If your school is old enough, you can look in your school library, or school librarian may have some old yearbooks from maybe the World War II era, but maybe the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and you can analyze it for what looks different from hairstyles and clothes, but then also what they choose to capture or chronicle in there. So you can use it to learn about World War II, certainly, but also the Civil Rights Movement, Korea, Vietnam, all the things all the way up to the present that students were interested in and felt needed to be documented.
Even in ours, even though I feel like, that's not that long ago, I mean, even look at how different our hair, our look is compared to students, today. And so... And
then also just the things that things that didn't exist or that existed in the 1940s yearbook that obviously wouldn't exist in a current one, be it sports or how they're laid out and how they communicate.
All right, we're going to give you a little bit more time. Someone's actually kind of sharing with us their personal, maybe they have a personal senior page. I had that in my high school where it was like you knew all about, and it was multiple pictures and what you were interested in, what you liked.
Sure.
So sometimes really putting your personality out there on those pages in a very permanent way, especially if you're a senior. So while you guys are thinking about this, and we can, that's good. I'll leave this poll question open kind of underneath us here, and you can continue to submit, and then I'll broadcast the results. But while we're doing this, I just want to briefly give you guys a little virtual tour of the site. And so give me a second to do that, to share my screen with everybody so we can see what this site looks like and see what you can explore here further. All right, so we are going to go here, and you should hopefully see in a second the See You Next Year website, which is WWII And, of course, there's a brief introduction. And if you scroll down, you can see all of the yearbooks we have digitized thus far. You may notice, like actually the people were calling out in Florida earlier, your state might not be on here, so we're actually still trying to collect some yearbooks. And we'll go through that list here at the end of the program. You can see that we do add some frequently, and there's some that we even didn't touch on today that are really great. And so even more of the same kind of themes that we look at. And when you go to each page, you'll see that, of course, where this is from, the fate of the school right now. Specific things to look for, vocabulary that we see kind of consistently used in here. And I think my favorite feature is that you can digitally scroll through these yearbooks. So you can see, you could scroll through and see, of course, again, this very common military theme of this Albert Lee High School, like graduating and on to potentially serving. So this is a really fun, you could just spend hours sitting here. And then this is more for our teachers. Colin created different lesson plans that are related to this, so you can actually dig in and have your students really get into the site related to these specific lesson plans. And then, of course, lastly, we've got some oral histories as well, so you can hear from people who were high schoolers during World War II, being interviewed by high schoolers here in New Orleans. So it's kind of your multi-generational interview. And then lastly, of course, talking about the states that we still need, and you can donate a yearbook on here. And while I stop sharing, I'm going to, in a second, show you guys what states we still need. So let me stop sharing and make that hide. And let's share and broadcast some of your results. Okay, so as I said, someone was really sharing with us what they think people will remember about them. they're crazy about cats, but yeah, the great things that you experience: inside jokes, plays, proms, sports, and of course graduation. too.
And technology. I mean, this is an era that we're dealing with where it's there's no internet. Television doesn't really exist. So things that can change as well. I mean, the fact that we almost all of us have smartphones we walk around with, something like that would just really be unthinkable. So in terms of capturing images in portraits, you might have your photo taken a few dozen times in your life in the 1940s, whereas we can do that at will now. So capturing these moments becomes a lot easier too, and how that influences what people share. And that's how Facebook even began. It began basically as a virtual yearbook site before it became sort of a social media site.
Right. So so just thinking about how we will put a lens on this 70 plus years in the future. And you're right, it's not just about even what's going on at your school locally, but even, as I said, a national lens with someone saying politics as well. Yeah. So people will be looking at how young people felt about, how we look at how young people felt about the war. Yep. We'll look back then to see how young people maybe felt about, the election and things like that. So a lot of interesting things to dig in there. Colin, before we kind of close out and see if anybody has any questions, any kind of final thoughts on, what we've seen here today?
This is a great way for students to see themselves reflected in history. I think a lot of people, like myself, I've always been interested in history, but I know some people really have not a dislike, but they don't think history has anything to do with them. And seeing this, really putting the student element right in the center of it, as opposed to sort of being an afterthought or not represented at all. It's a really fun way to learn about World War II from a student's eye view, but then also if you can find one from your area or state, how people in your home state, county, or region of the world were experiencing this just great turning point in 20th century history. And it's been a lot of fun to work on, and I hope you've enjoyed seeing the slides we've had to present.
So as you know, that's the website you can go to. Actually, we're going to transition into one more area, and you're actually going to see Colin and I officially go away on the webcam. So bye in that regard, but we'll do Q&A. Let's see if anybody has any questions now before we transition and show you what slides what yearbooks we still need. So, all right, let's show you guys what we still need here. And we'll let that presentation pop up. But we have many states, and sometimes we have multiple yearbooks from states. But there are a lot of states where we also do not have a yearbook yet. And if you see your state on here, maybe you can bug your librarian at your school to see if they would be even willing to lend us one to even scan to be part of this collection. So I think we saw Florida on there.
Weeki Wachee. I went there on vacation a couple of years ago. I love the mermaids. So if there can be a yearbook from that part of the world, we know it's the elements are not kind to paper artifacts, especially areas that are prone to tropical weather like we are. So Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, we know those are definite concerns.
Yeah, and it was for a while. It took us a little bit even to get Louisiana yearbooks because a lot has been destroyed in all these states in hurricanes and flooding and all that kind of stuff. Before we transition, I'll show you a few more slides here. For teachers especially, if you didn't get that yearbook teacher guide, it's right below that Q&A pod, so be sure to download that. Also resend it again one more time. Of course, we've kind of went through a tour of what this site has to offer. And then lastly, for our teachers, if you're looking for more World War II lesson plans that aren't maybe this specific, we have many more lesson plans on www.classroom.org. And right now you'll see lesson plans related to the war in the Pacific. Very shortly there'll be lesson plans about the war in Europe, so you can really have a full suite of curriculum when you get into the meat of teaching World War II. And actually, you know what? That's about it for all of us here. Colin and I were so pleased to present to you guys today. This is our final webinar for the school year. Yeah. Sniff, sniff, sad. But we really appreciate all your participation.
Absolutely. And no, it's like the name of the website says. You can see you next year when we have more programs to present.
We will see you next year. So, and again, if anybody wants to share their embarrassing yearbook photos with us, please. You know how to get a hold of us here. So you maybe make us feel a little bit better about putting our high school selves out there for the world to see. But anyway, from Chrissy and Colin at the National World War